the three panelists who we have here with us today, and I'm just going to pin all of you really quickly. And I'll go ahead and ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Edgardo to start with your introductions.
Yep. Hello, my name is Edgardo Sanchez Rivas. I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm a third year PhD candidate in the biochemistry, molecular biology, and biophysics of University of Minnesota, and glad to help today.
Thank you very much. Maria? Oh, you're not mute yet.
My name is Maria Carmona. I am the owner of MBC Business Solutions, LLC in East Haven. And I'm so happy and happy to be able to help with some of your questions about tax preparation.
Thank you very much. And Emily.
Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Roberts. My business is Personal Finance for PhDs. I'm a financial educator who specializes in graduate students who receive stipends and postdocs. I work with universities to deliver financial education, including quite a bit of tax education. And so I actually teach this a lot. So I'm really happy to be here today and to help you all. I'm putting in the chat right now a link to a one-page cheat sheet on taxes for graduate students. Now, this one is specifically for people who are U.S. citizens, permanent residents for tax purposes. So grab that if it's of interest to you, and I hope it helps. And really glad to be talking with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And before we start, you've probably seen the disclaimer throughout all of that. So nothing in this webinar meeting should be considered tax, legal, or financial advice for any individual. And as appropriate, of course, the panelists can give whatever, a little bit more nuance or any other disclaimers that you may need. So we're gonna start extremely broadly. And we did have some pre-submitted questions from GSEC members. And the first one, which is more a statement than a question, is, I have no idea where to even start. And so I don't know if that's enough guidance for the panelists to kind of go, very broadly, where to even start for taxes and generally finances as a grad student. And maybe we can start with Edgardo, just with your experience, and if you have any, from your experiences, and then a little bit more with Maria and Emily for maybe a little bit more specifics on that.
If I mute myself, I will say the first step that was kind of not clear for me when I started, it's define how are you getting paid. It's the first step. Like usually grad students at the beginning are paid either by the program or they're doing some type of TA-ship. So they're getting paid through like a TA-ship that is not a fellowship. Then you transition to like a fellowship and it's a different story on how to do or how to get that information from one side or the other. So I think the first place to start is how I'm getting paid, and that will ease the next step if you're only paid by the university.
Thank you very much. Maria?
Okay, so I will say how to start, and I have a lot of my clients coming to me and said, oh my God, what I'm gonna do, what do I need to bring to you and everything, because it's a lot of paperwork, and sometimes you think because you're a student, you don't have much to report, but you actually do. So what I will say is to start collecting everything that has to do with tax information. Those big envelopes that come to your mail saying tax information, tax document, especially your W-2s. If you have, maybe some students, they have 1 or 2 jobs. Maybe one job is with a W-2, maybe another job with a 1099, So have all those ready. Have your 1098-Ts, which is the tuition for your school. Have that ready as well. Some of you will get the 1095A depending on what type of insurance, medical insurance you have. Some of you receive a 1095A form. Those need to be reported on your taxes as well. Which you're still in school, so you don't have to worry about the 1098Es, which is the interest, whatever you pay school loans interest. So if you're still in school, you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so I will say, put everything together, whatever information you might think, oh, I don't know if I need to bring this to my tax preparer, just bring it with you because you might need it. You might need it. So the more organized you are, the better, your tax preparer is going to be able to do and handle your taxes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roberts.
Yeah, I just want to underline both points that you all just made. First of all, I agree with starting with understanding your funding and how you're being paid. It's also not just your stipend. Like you're receiving more funding than just your stipend. There's money that goes towards paying your tuition, your fees, and other types of education expenses. So definitely understand, are you being paid a W-2, like you are a part-time employee of the university? Are you being paid not W-2? I have a framework that calls this awarded income. Like, are you receiving fellowship income, scholarship type income? Could be a combination of both. If you're funded, you almost certainly have awarded income because that's what's going towards paying your tuition and fees and so forth most of the time. So definitely understanding the type of income that you have, the documents associated with those income, like Maria was just saying, collect all those documents, but also understand there may be income that you receive that's not appearing on any kind of document, depending on your university's policies. So just because you didn't receive a document for something doesn't mean you didn't have income. That's something to really investigate. And furthermore, also on that documentation front, just like collect and reflect and document as best you can on the expenses that you incurred during the year. That's a general good idea to for your taxes overall. Like, is anything going to be a deduction or a credit that you might be able to take? But specifically with respect to your role as a graduate student, were there any qualified education expenses that you incurred in the course of the year that you might be able to use for a credit or a deduction? And so even remembering things you paid for out of pocket, like for textbooks or maybe even a personal computer, like those things might ultimately be considered qualified education expenses. We can go into that more later, but that first step is just understanding all the sources of income, understanding all the expenses, and documenting them as best as you can.
That is really excellent. Thank you. So I think that the next question is a good follow-up, and that is, what are the differences for taxes between if I am funded by external fellowship, if my advisor pays me, if I have a teaching assistant position, or a training grant, and probably some other things that just weren't asked. And I think we can just go in the general same direction, unless panelists choose to switch it up.
Yeah, one of the things, or kind of like the main difference, is that if you're getting paid by an external fellowship, usually they do not withhold taxes from your stipend, compare if you're getting paid by a TA-ship. That's one of the main difference that you will see on your paycheck. Like, it's like, oh, I'm getting paid more, but it's not that you're getting paid more, it's that you're not getting the taxes withheld. Other thing on that end, like training grants, external fellowships, usually some training grants are internal fellowships basically, and they will be on the same group of grants versus TA ship or RA ships.
Okay, so and thank you, Edgardo. I learned something new from you today too. It's too many grants, too many fellowships that it's hard to keep up with. So, and I can give you an example. I had a couple of students this year that they were receiving stipends from school, and last year they didn't report them, and they got charged because they were not withholding taxes. So it's very important to understand what type of income, again, you're receiving. Because if you're receiving some taxable income, you have to make sure if they don't deduct taxes from you, you have to report them at the end of the year, and that way you can just take care of those taxes. Keep in mind that if you report those, that will be more like a self-employed, like people take it like a self-employed income, and you know what? And it's not that. So that's why you have to understand really well what to report. So that's why bring everything you have, tell everything to your tax preparer, what income you received, even if you think it's not taxable, just say it, because that way, when you come to one of us, you will be able to make sure everything is reported, whatever needs to be reported, especially fellowships. And don't think that tax preparers, we know it all. We even have to read, do our own research, and in order for us to be able to give you the right answer and guide you the correct way.
Yeah, just again to emphasize those excellent answers. Take it back a step. W-2 income, we all understand it's going to go into your taxable income, right? That's very straightforward if you're a part-time employee of your university. Fellowship income, also taxable to the extent that it exceeds your qualified education expenses. So when I mentioned earlier, collecting all your income sources, if you have a scholarship, for example, that exactly pays your tuition charge, they net out against each other, that scholarship is not part of your taxable income. But generally speaking, what goes to become your stipend, like what you kind of take home. Now, you have to do this calculation precisely, so I'm speaking very generally, but more or less, that's going to be taxable. So whether you receive your stipend in the form of a W-2 or whether it's this what I call awarded income, kind of the fellowship training grant type income, it's going to end up being taxable. And like Edgardo and Maria just mentioned, at the end of the year, if you didn't have any income tax withheld on that fellowship income, which is very common, then you may be hit with a large tax bill. And so to prevent that from happening in the future, you should engage with the estimated tax system. You may be required to. And so it's a great idea to fill out Form 1040-ES, the estimated tax worksheet, which is on page 8, to figure out whether or not paying estimated tax is required of you, which it may very well be in a year when you receive like all fellowship income for like the whole year, for example. But a good idea to fill it out whenever you have fellowship income. I'm so glad Maria brought up self-employment also, because fellowship type income can often be mistaken for self-employment income. And that's a really costly mistake to make. So be very clear with your tax software or with your tax preparer that you are not self-employed, at least with respect to this, portion of your income that comes from your role as a graduate student, because you can pay way too much in tax and it can get really confusing if you sort of start down that road.
Yes, thank you. I almost made that mistake, and I was working with taxpayers who like just didn't work with students, and it was beyond unreasonable how much one would owe if you just clicked that wrong box. So thank you very much. There's another question in the chat, but there's one that was sent to me, and I'll just read it out. It's a little bit related. So if I'm being paid by a fellowship and not getting any tax papers for it, how do I figure out how much I owe and should be paying in taxes? And I think y'all touched on it a little bit, so maybe you can answer that one specifically.
Yeah. So usually, like I am paid by a training grant, and the training grant, it's not obligated to submit any type of tax documentation. However, the university will give you the 1098T, where you will see the box of how much you're paying for tuition and how much you got from the grant money and awards. Basically, the difference between these two is the one that it's your award income, or kind of your stipend. It's the difference between these two. And usually that's the one that will get taxed. It's not, as Emily mentioned, it's not the net between what you paid for tuition, it's what it's exceeded the tuition money.
Thank you. Any other panelists? Very good for that one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't know if I got the right question, that if I took it the right way, so that's why I was not too clear. But what Edgardo says, it makes a difference of if you receive more grants than what your tuition was, you're not gonna get no credit. So I have to put it out there. You will not receive any credit, which we're gonna talk about it later, the American Opportunity, credits. But it's just the difference, the one that it makes sense. So if your tuition was higher than grants, yes, the system will take that into consideration. So I don't know if Dr. Emily Roberts has something else to say, because I didn't hear the question from the beginning. And so.
Yeah, I can add on to both those answers. So to the original question, which is about, I didn't receive any paperwork regarding my, awarded income, fellowship type income, training grant type income. And in Garda's situation, it sounds like you did receive a Form 1080T from your university, but your university is not required, universities in general are not required to actually generate a Form 1098T if, like what you were talking about, if box 5, the scholarships and grants sum exceeds what's in box 1, the qualified tuition and related, tuition and qualified expenses. No, sorry, I'm getting the day wrong. Qualified tuition related expenses, whatever is in box 1. They don't have to generate that form. So some of you may receive a Form 1090T and have that situation reflected on it. And some of you universities may just opt out of sending you one at all. So I don't actually love the 1090T relying on that as a documentation source of fellowship and awarded income. I actually would prefer that you just log into your student account and look at the transactions directly that are posted there, both the money that's coming in, the scholarship type money, and also the charges that have been made to the student account. And then you can do the math to figure out what your excess awarded income, your excess scholarship and fellowship income is. Now, I want to slightly correct what Edgardo said, because it's not always the case that your box 5 minus box 1 is equal to your taxable fellowship and scholarship income, because there may be qualified education expenses that you can use to make scholarship and fellowship income tax-free that are not reflected in box 1 of your Form 1090T. Specifically, I'm speaking about student health fees and the money that pays the premium on your health insurance policy. These might be considered qualified education expenses, depending on exactly how they're set up, but they won't appear in box 1 because that's just not how box 1 is defined. So you're actually you could be missing out on deductions. You could be paying more in tax than you need to if you don't actually investigate the charges in your student account and maybe compare them against what you see in box 1. Ultimately, you may be able to make more of your scholarship and fellowship income tax-free than just what appears in box 1. Oh, and to go back again to the original question, if you didn't receive any documentation, you just have to look at your bank account. Like, you just have to know how much money did you actually receive if there's no documentation around it whatsoever.
Thank you very much. And that's actually a really great segue to the next question. And I'm also putting the questions in the chat so everyone can read or hear. What are some things I could claim for taxes that could help me save money? And I think that's also maybe linked to the submitted question, are conference expenses a qualified business expense as well? So we can, yeah, general and then maybe more specific as well.
Yeah, I will pass this question to Emily. I think at least in what I know, as I have like additional works like alongside. It's like it depends on what you're working on. Like music, they have different setups of what I can use my money to get like better deduction stuff. But I will pass in this question to have a better answer.
Yeah, maybe we can do Maria and then Emily. And I'm also getting some other questions in the chat, but I'll ask them after.
But some of the expenses and our conference expenses qualify business expense. If that has something to do with what you're doing for business, of course, is a like whatever you pay for your to go to your conference, that can be a business expense. Whatever is related to your let's say if it's a business, if it's related to your business, you can deduct as a business expense. If you're going to school and you need to take a course, class, and out of pocket, that you can deduct as an expense out of pocket because it was needed for a school and it was required for you to complete the program. So those are expenses that you can put. Also, like Dr. Emily Roberts said it before, laptop, something that you need, tools, equipment that you need in order for you to go to school is required. Medical school, sometimes they require this stethoscopes, whatever it's called. Those things are deductible. So that's why it's very important for you before you start doing your taxes or you go somewhere else to your taxes, make a list of expenses that you had, out of pocket expenses that you had, and then the tax preparer will let you know if that's a qualified expense for you to put down in there.
Yes, exactly. Just to emphasize what Maria said. So start with documenting everything. I have a workshop that I teach that you can join if you want to. I'll actually put the link in the chat. a workshop that goes into a great detail about defining what is a qualified education expense under what benefit. But the process always starts with, what are all of my education related expenses? And then to drill down into each one, is this one a qualified education expense, and under which benefit are we talking about? Because there's 3 different higher education tax benefits. There's making scholarship and fellowship income tax-free, which is mostly what I've been talking about and mostly what funded graduate students use. There's also the lifetime learning credit and the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which could be appropriate in certain more narrow scenarios. By the way, the term qualified education expenses is used for all 3 of these benefits, but they all have a different definition of what a qualified education expense is. So you have to be really careful when you're trying to figure out which of your expenses might be qualified. You have to know which benefit you're talking about, and then of course, drill down to the definition. I want to actually pull up, I'm looking at publication 970, which is kind of my go-to resource for this stuff. I'll put it in the chat. And I'm on page 6. So I just want to read the definition of a qualified education expense for tax-free scholarships and fellowships, just so you have an idea of what it is. For purposes of tax-free scholarships and fellowship grants, these are expenses for tuition and fees required to enroll at or attend an eligible educational institution, and course-related expenses such as fees, books, supplies, and equipment that are required for the courses at the eligible educational institution. These items must be required for all students in your course of instruction. So like when Maria was talking earlier about like a personal computer, for example, a personal computer is a great case study because it could be a qualified education expense if it is required of everyone in your course of study. So if everyone in your program, for example, is required to have a personal computer, and you can find that documentation in someone's syllabus or on the website or in an email from your, from your grad director, then that is the documentation you need to show the IRS that it is a qualified education expense. However, there are many, many cases where, I mean, of course, we all know that like a personal computer is a requirement during graduate school, but if it's not explicitly stated as such, then I don't think you can consider it a qualified education expense under tax-free scholarships and fellowships. So that documentation part of it is really important. And I do want to expand on the definition I said earlier because there's a little more to publication 970. Expenses that don't qualify. Qualified education expenses don't include the cost of room and board, travel, research, clerical help, or equipment and other expenses that aren't required for enrollment in or attendance at an eligible educational institution. And the way that I interpret this is that if you do something for the purpose of your PhD program that is individual to your research, not required of everyone in a course, not required of everyone in your program, and you incur expenses with that, those expenses are not likely to be qualified education expenses because it was up to you and your advisor to determine that it was, a good idea for you to do it, but was it required of everyone? No, it doesn't sound like it. So generally speaking, professional development, conference expenses, these kinds of things, I would not consider those qualified education expenses. I'm speaking very broadly. Obviously, every case could be some nuances here, but that's how I interpret it. So when Maria mentioned earlier, would traveling for a conference be a qualified business expense? Well, yes, if you have a business, but we're not, as a graduate student, you don't have a business. I mean, you may have a business, but it's not being a graduate student. So you have to be really careful about understanding that just because something is a deductible expense in another area of the tax code, like in the business area, it doesn't mean it is when we're talking about higher education.
That's so helpful. Thank you very much. I think we're switching. So there are some other questions in the chat. I'm going to put them toward the end because I think they're a little bit more nuanced. So the next question that we had pre-submitted was, what are good websites for students to do their taxes? And I'm going to actually link that also with the other pre-submitted question, which was, it's related. It seems like TurboTax is not completely free. Is there a free alternative? So both of those questions are up and they're in the chat as well.
Yeah. So it would, one thing could depend on the university. Like my University of Minnesota give us open for free. It's not TurboTax, it's TaxSlayer for free on the like certain period of time. So it's like for to say like TaxSlayer is not free until they open for free for the students. Additionally, you can check and I will put the link here in the chat. Through the IRS, if you're getting paid less than 79,000, you're it's not available, but you're like granted that you'll be able to fill your taxes for free in guided systems, and they have like different options. If you're getting paid less than 79,000, and as a grad student, you will get paid less than 79,000. So you you don't need to pay to fill your taxes unless you want someone to help you directly, or you can use the tax volunteers that usually some universities have.
Yes. And and I have a day job which I help low income folks. So usually what I tell them, the advice that I give them is just use those VITA sites, the volunteer income tax, assistant programs. You just have to call 211 and they will tell you exactly where to go. They have different locations, different times. Even like Edgardo mentioned, some schools, they provide their own, site for students to do it. VITA services, they have people that volunteer to do taxes for you, and you have to meet their income guidelines. If I'm not mistaken, if you make less than $58,000, they will be able to help you for free. You don't have to pay anything. So that's an option for you. And again, yeah, TurboTax is not free. H&R Black is not free. So, and they can get expensive unless you want to go to a tax preparer to do it for you as well. Because sometimes people get scared. They don't want to do it themselves. So, but VITA is a great, great, great site for you to go and do your taxes.
Nothing much to add there. Definitely check your university for resources, either software or a VITA program. Go through IRS Free File if you can't get something more specific available to you through your university. You should qualify most likely for all of those services. Specifically with Free File, I would say use Free Tax USA instead of maybe one of those more well-known packages. They handle fellowship income much more intuitively, so you'll probably struggle less with Free Tax USA, which is available through Free File. So it should be both completely free at the federal and the state level, assuming you have the income qualifications.
Excellent, thank you. I'm gonna pop in here one of the submitted questions. I think it's to me, but I'm gonna put it for everyone. Can speakers speak more about whether health insurance or required student fees that get lumped in with tuition costs can fall into tax benefits for students? So we're asking about health insurance. Health insurance as tax benefits.
I will add from that question is that, for example, TurboTax do not accept anymore the 1095. So it's like through, like, I will not know for how to add those expenses, but at least the form of the 1095 is not available anymore for TurboTax, at least.
Well, the little bit that I can put into this question is that again, the 1095A, and you will agree with me, Dr. Emily, that it has to be reported into your taxes. But if I read the question correctly, if you pay money out of pocket for your medical premiums, or you pay for prescriptions out of pocket, you can claim that on your taxes, but most likely it's not going to make a difference because you have to reach some go over that threshold that you qualify for. So I personally, to give some how you say, give some my mind went blank, peace of mind to my client. I just put everything in there just for them to look at it and see, okay, you put it, didn't make no difference, but we put it there. So because that way, sometimes people think, oh my God, but I pay $1,000 in prescription out of pocket, or I pay my eye doctor out of pocket. It's not gonna, most likely it's not gonna make a difference unless you have a lot of itemized deductions. But we like, people like to put them in there just in case.
I'm interpreting this question to be about the premium that's paid for health insurance, for student health insurance. So the question is kind of, I said earlier, you have to consider all your sources of income, your awarded income, the scholarships and fellowships, the money that goes towards paying for things in your student account. That is part of your income. The question is whether you can make it tax-free using a qualified education expense under the definition of tax-free scholarships and fellowships. Insurance and other personal expenses are explicitly listed as not qualified education expenses under the Lifetime Learning Credit and the American Opportunity Tax Credit. But those are not the benefits that we're discussing right now. We're discussing tax-free scholarships and fellowships. Insurance is not mentioned as one of those on the exclusion list. And so my interpretation, and I actually hired a CPA to help me with this interpretation, is that because if health insurance is required of you as a student, and if you have student health insurance, it's being paid for by your university, charged through your university and so forth, because it is a widely applied fee, even if it's not technically applied to every single student at the university, that fee can be considered a qualified education expense under tax-free scholarships and fellowships. Now, this is an interpretation. This is a gray area, but I've been teaching it this way for a number of years now, and I have not gotten any pushback. Nothing has gotten back to me about, the IRS told me that I couldn't do this, blah, blah. So I think the interpretation's okay. So that's my interpretation on that. Now, again, health insurance has to be required of you, and it can't be something that you purchased externally to the university, right? That's not going to be able to be deductible if you went through the marketplace or whatever. It has to be through the university, charged the way the other student fees are being charged. Quick note about dental and vision insurance. Maybe you receive that as a benefit as a student. If it's not required, then I don't think it can be considered a qualified education expense, even if it's charged the same way as the other things. Now, if it's required of you, then it would fall under kind of the same bucket as the health insurance, but that could be like a differentiating factor, like if that's not required of you. So again, go back to those very specific definitions of what a qualified education expense is and try to really, interpret whether or not your expenses can be considered qualified under tax-free scholarships and fellowships. Once again, my workshops go into great deal of detail about how to make those interpretations.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So the next question, shifting gears a little bit again, taxes when you just joined grad school and had a job prior to matriculating. And I interpreted this, at least in part, referring to also kind of like that half-year switch, half of the year you're working like a job income versus a student and what that entails.
I don't have experience on that one. I know that then you have to, as in the previous questions, Emily and Maria has said, like you have to collect all that information and all your incomes. So you have to report like each of them. So at the end, it will not be that different, just you will have more documentation to report.
Yeah, like I said, even if it's before matriculating, after matriculating, whatever you earn in that particular tax year, you have to bring it to your tax preparer or, because most likely income is income, okay? So most likely it's gonna be, if it's a regular job with W-2, it's taxable. So even if and that's how I interpreted this question, it's like, if it switch, like what type of income it is, or if it was before they matriculated to school or afterwards, whatever you earned, during that tax year, you have to report it. Some of it might not be taxable due to whatever reasons that we talked before, but you have to make sure you disclose everything so that way your tax preparer or the system, you can make sure you mark the right box. Because one little box can make the big difference.
Yeah, nothing else to add there. It just all gets lumped together in your federal return. The complicating part is maybe if you move states, you may have to be like a part-year resident of 2 states or perhaps something else, depending on the exact circumstances. So that could be a little bit more complicated. But at the federal level, it's pretty simple to just combine everything.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The next question is, do we have to pay taxes monthly or can we wait to pay the total in April? And again, I'm sure there's nuances there, so we can go in the same order.
I will say, like something that happened to me is that when I noticed that the university was not withholding taxes because I was getting paid as a fellowship, I was recommended to fill a W-4, that is the one that you tell the university for them to withhold additional taxes. However, for some, and I think they will depend on the university, but my university, it cannot withhold any money from fellowships, even though I had the W-4 already filled. So if you're like if you're getting the money and holding that taxable money or that money to pay for taxes for the end of the year, I will say not recommended. It's a lot of money. For example, like if you're getting paid like around 34,000 a stipend, that's like around almost $3,000 on taxes for federal and state together, and that's a big payment in one time. Uh, Other thing than monthly, you can do that every 3 months. That will be like with the IRS you pay quarterly, and that will be a way to kind of like, if you're not getting tax withheld, then it like storing that every 4 months and then doing the payments directly to the IRS or to your specific state taxes software.
Yeah, like Edgardo said, the best way to do it, like, and again, it's hard. It's hard to save all this money to the side and not touch it here and there, Again, we all go through that. So the best way of doing it is to just do it like quarterly payments directly with the IRS, estimated tax payment every quarter. And that way, when you do your taxes, you can just, that amount, it goes in your taxes saying how much money you put, you paid on your estimated payments, you put that amount. And if you overpaid, of course, you get a refund. Okay. So that's the best way of doing it. I think that's the smartest way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree with what was just said. If you're not having income tax withheld from your paychecks, I would say step one is to set up what I call a system of self-withholding. So it is to set up a separate named savings account, says tax on it or income tax. And just as your university would have split your paycheck and part comes to you and part goes to the IRS and your state tax agency, you split your own paycheck. You receive the majority of it for yourself and your spending, and you have a calculation for how much needs to go into that savings account. But as you said, that savings account is sitting there tempting you month after month. And so it is a good idea, I would say, just to pay those estimated taxes quarterly, so 4 times per year. I put in the chat the link to the form that you fill out to sort of do that calculation of whether or not estimated taxes are required of you and how much. Whether or not it's required of you, you could still go ahead and pay just to have that money out of your hands. And I do think that's a good idea, so that when you settle up, when you file your tax return at the end of the year, you compare how much you owed with how much you paid in estimated tax, and hopefully you'll be pretty close. Maybe you'll get a small refund, maybe you'll owe a small amount, but it should be pretty close to the calculation that you made. So definitely, if you're on fellowship, fill out Form 1040-S, the estimated tax worksheet, figure out what's required of you. And if it is required of you and you don't pay quarterly, you may end up with some penalties and interest at the end of the year, which is never pleasant. So just go ahead and make those quarterly payments.
Thank you. So the next two were just submitted in the chat, and then we're gonna near the end of the pre-submitted, which is more about international. They're a little bit more nuanced. So these two questions are, I guess, kinds of income questions. So the first one is, how do you deduce whether being granted a fellowship versus an internal stipend would be better? As in, which one would I pay less taxes on if a student is given the option to choose which to be funded by? And a related one, I think, question 2, how to report research assistantship and teaching assistantship for taxes.
Not sure as if there will be any difference between like if you're doing fellowship versus internal stipend in terms of because it's income will be income and they will be reported on the same place or same format, but maybe I'm wrong on that. maybe there's a nuance and some difference between it. And how to report research assistantship. At least when I did my TA-ship and RA-ship, it was very similar. It was basically the same.
And to be honest, I think Dr. Roberts will have a better answer. But like Edgardo said, income is income, so it's going to be reported in the same place and at the same tax rate, depending what your income level is. So I don't have much else to say. So I pass it down to you.
Yeah. I would say go for the one that pays you more. If there's a difference, it doesn't matter. Paying more tax is okay if you had more income. If they're exactly the same, then if they're both awarded income, I don't think it's going to make a difference. Like an external fellowship versus internal fellowship or training grant type thing, I don't think it's going to make a difference. However, if one is fellowship and one is W-2, like the internal one maybe is W-2, there might be a chance that you could pay less tax if you went for the fellowship option because, for example, when I talked earlier about like buying a personal computer, that could be a qualified education expense, but it can only net against fellowship and scholarship income. It can't net against W-2 income. So you have to like have the fellowship and scholarship income to make it tax-free, if that makes sense. But most of the time most years you're not going to have an expense like that, right? That would be a very unusual circumstance. So chances are if you're being paid the same and it's W-2 versus awarded income, most of the time it's going to turn out the same tax-wise. You're not going to pay any more or any less. It's only in those edge case scenarios where you had a qualified education expense, but in one case you had fellowship income, in one case you didn't have fellowship income to net it against. I hope that makes sense. So very edge cases, maybe the fellowship would make more sense, but most of the time it's probably not going to make a difference.
Great.
Oh, sorry, I wanted to add about
yes.
the assistantship research versus teaching. Most universities, the way they use their language is that assistantships means W-2. It means employee position. So it's reported the same way. It's line 1A of your 1040, either way. Now, it's possible your university uses the term assistantship differently, and it's actually what I'm calling awarded income or fellowship type income, in which case it's reported a little bit differently. But again, the tax is kind of the same. It's your taxable scholarship and fellowship income goes on Form 1040 Schedule 1, line 8R. So it's a different spot on the tax return, but it all kinds of comes out to be part of your income anyway, like we've been talking about.
Thank you very much. So our next question, and this is the last pre-submitted question. So if other attendees have other questions you'd like to submit, please do so in the chat. So this one is, do you know how to proceed with my taxes if I receive funding from my home country, Science Council, in this case, CONACYT for Mexico, could be any country, plus my advisor's funding?
I will pass this question. Yeah.
All right. According to the IRS, any wages, earned income, unearned income is U.S. taxable, no matter what the income comes, So, and regardless where you earn your income, you always have to, file as a requirement, any income. But Dr. Emily, if you can just add into this question.
Yeah, so big differentiation here is whether this person is considered a resident for tax purposes or non-resident for tax purposes. So I actually read this as possibly they're non-resident for tax purposes, in which case how to proceed with your taxes is, first of all, use software. Sprint Tax is really great for non-residents. What's going to happen, and I looked this up beforehand, so you can actually look up like really quick summaries of the tax treaties that are between the US and all the other countries where we have tax treaties. So I looked it up for, this is Mexico, right? It's on page 23. So I'm just going to read, it's really short. A student or business apprentice who is a resident of Mexico immediately before visiting the United States and is in the United States solely for the purpose of education or training is exempt from U.S. tax on amounts received from sources outside the United States for the individual's maintenance, education, or training. So what I would expect to happen is that portion of the funding that's coming from Mexico, if this person is a non-resident, that portion is not going to be included in their taxable income. They're going to cite the tax treaty as the reason why. Now, the other funding that you receive that's from internal to the U.S., plus the advisor's funding. Yeah, so there is also funding that's coming from a U.S. source. So that's going to end up being taxable. So that's not under the tax treaty exemption. So you'll have kind of a little bit of both. But software like SprintX, again, is excellent at handling all these things. So that's how I would go if I were in this situation. But like Maria was saying, if this person is a US citizen, resident for tax purposes, permanent resident, et cetera, then the US taxes your worldwide income if you're in one of those categories. So it's all going to become part of your taxable income. So that status of resident for tax purposes versus non-resident is the first really important thing to figure out. And to do that, you'll probably apply the substantial presence test.
Great. We have a few more questions for like international related. There was one that was just, I'm going to read 3 of them in a row just because we're running out of time, and then we can kind of tag team however you wish to answer them. So one is, you have to fill 1042 if you are international but considered resident alien for tax purposes. And then the other 2 questions are, how to report fellowship income if I don't get a taxable format for it? What's deductible from the fellowship? And specifically for this person, according to my school, the fellowship should not be taxed for my case, which is international student, but resident for tax purposes. And the 3rd question, before joining my current lab, I was remotely working from my home country as a consultant for the same lab. So when arriving here, I received the paycheck from the university for my remote work done externally. So under which field, quote unquote, can I declare the extra income? So those are a lot, but they're in the same vein. So I'll leave it to the panelists to choose how you want to answer those.
I am not too familiar with the Form 1042, to be honest, so I'll have to leave it to Dr. Emily Roberts. And I think question 1 is, like how to report fellowship income if they don't get the tax form. Again, like I think we mentioned it before, just keep record of how much money you earn. Share that information with your tax preparer. That way they can find out if that type of income is going to be taxable or not. And also for question 2, before joining my current lab, I was remotely working from my home country. So the way that I take it, she received payment within the United States. So income is going to be taxable. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Emily, but you will have to report that income. Most likely, if it's a 1099 again, if it was a, income received by doing employment, it is considered as like a self-employment. So you will have to do in a Schedule C. But again, Dr. Emily, you correct me if I'm wrong, and you can take after this.
Yeah, these are great nuanced questions. Okay, the first one, do you have to fill out a 1042 if you're international but considered a resident alien for tax purposes? So the Form 1042S is one that your university would generate for you, similar to a W-2, similar to a 1098T. So it's not something that you would generate. Now, because you're a resident alien for tax purposes, the Form 1042S is no longer relevant for you. That is strictly for non-residents. So you don't have to generate it. Your university is not generating it for you. You're going to fall under the category that we've been talking about all along, about figuring out what your income was, figuring out what your expenses were, collecting it all together on that tax return. So the answer is no, you don't have to do that, but you will have to fill out a Form 1040 and the associated forms now that you're a resident for tax purposes. The second question, how to report fellowship income you don't get taxed from for it, we did address this. So the nuance here is that this person's, according to my school, the fellowship should not be taxed for my case, international student, but resident for tax purposes. And this is a phrasing that I hear a lot from graduate students that they're sort of passing on to me is, my university told me this. And they say something like, my income isn't taxable. I have a fellowship, it's not taxed. Now, what the university means is what Edgardo has been talking about, which is your university is not going to withhold income tax for you. According to them, it's not taxable. It's not their responsibility to do that withholding, but that doesn't mean it's not taxable to you as an individual. So it's very tricky. You have to understand their perspective when they say something like that. So it kind of through the grapevine, it can get really confusing. So because again, you're a resident for tax purposes, you're falling into this category that we talked about earlier, all of your income, all of your expenses collected on the tax return. So even though you didn't get a form, you're still responsible for figuring out what your income was with respect to that fellowship. So your university is telling you that they're not going to withhold taxes, but they're not saying anything about whether or not it's ultimately going to be taxable income to you. They're not making a comment about that. As for the last question, regarding working remotely from your home country, I'm going to say this is completely outside of my wheelhouse. And I think that you need to go to a professional tax preparer who specializes in cross-border tax issues. I specifically have someone that I consult with when I have questions that are beyond my ability. So I'm going to put her website into the chat so you can go, see her if you have a complicated situation like this one, which it does sound like it's complicated between the self-employment and the working for the university but working in another country. And wait, you received the paycheck when you arrived, why didn't you receive it before you arrived? This is very confusing to me, so I think you need some expert help in that area.
Those are all really great. Thank you very much. So if anyone has any final, we are starting to wrap up. If anyone has any final questions, please do put them in the chat. All the pre-submitted questions have been covered. And at this point, we also would like to give the panelists a chance if you have either any disclaimers or any additional resources that you would like to share with the attendees today.
I think that I'm also getting a lot of resources from this talk. Right now I can just repost all the links that we have submitted in just one text, so it's easier to get all together if anyone need. So thanks for that.
And my only disclaimer will be that we always, every day, we learn from each other, like we always are learning new things every day. This answers given by me today was to the best of my knowledge. Don't go by what other people say, because sometimes everybody makes mistakes. Everybody might, we might be wrong. So just do the research. That's very important for you to do a research. If you still have a doubt on something, just go into the links that Dr. Emily shared with us, because there is a lot of information that not even us as professional, as tax preparer, we know it, as you can see, international questions, it can be tricky, and we'd rather be safe than sorry and do this the right way and reach out to other professionals that are experts in those fields.
Yeah, similarly, this is a one-to-many communication format, and so you can't consider anything that any of us said as advice for tax, legal, or financial purposes. As I said earlier, I'm a financial educator. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a CFP or anything like that. I just have read extensively and talked with a lot of people about how their taxes work. So thank you, Edgardo. But I'm just going to add to the chat one more time the cheat sheet that I prepared for those of you working on your taxes as graduate students. I would love it if you would grab that. And by the way, if you benefited from this session, specifically my contributions to it, again, I work with universities to teach this material during tax season. And so I would really appreciate you remembering that for next tax season and recommending that your university sponsor one of my tax workshops, because I deliver this kind of financial education with partners all over the country. So get on my mailing list, stay in touch, and I'd love to serve you and your peers at your university next year.
It's amazing. Thank you to all three of you. And before we end, so there was one question that was, I guess, a follow-up question. So this is referring again to the 1042 question, which is the if you are international but considered resident alien for tax purposes. In this scenario, if the university has generated 1042 thinking that I am a non-resident alien, would you just not use it? That's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I might go back to the university and say, like, I actually am a resident. You shouldn't have generated this. Because the thing is, the IRS is they're going to receive a copy of that, right? So they'll have that. But in general, if you can't get it like corrected or whatever, I mean, there's nothing to correct. They really just shouldn't have issued it if you're confident in your status. Yeah, just don't use it. Just you're going to fill out a Form 1040, not a Form 1040 NR. And so it's not a relevant form for that. So you're just going to report the income in a different way. But it would be helpful if your university was supposed to issue like a different form, but they issued a 1042S instead. Like maybe they should have done a W-2, or maybe they should have done the Form 1098T. It would be helpful for them to know that. Usually they're pretty on top of these things though. So this is a not a typical scenario, I would say.
Great, thank you very much. We're almost at time. I think I don't see any other questions. We can hang out for a couple more minutes. But at this point, I would like to thank all three panelists, Edgardo, Maria, Emily. Thank you so much. This is one of our most needed financial literacy as a grad student is so needed. So we appreciate the work that you do and for volunteering your time for this panel and for the Científico Latino and the GSEC communities and more broadly for the people who register through the public link. Thank you very much for your time and expertise and sharing it with us.
Thank you for having us.
Give it another minute, but probably this is the end. Thank you very much. Right on time. Thank you. We will email the panelists. A very last second question, if you're okay to stay on just 30 seconds more. The default method is to use as many of your QEEs as possible to make part or all of your awarded income tax-free, e.g. subtract your tuition charge from your tuition scholarship. Can I do this if my tuition was paid for by the fellowship?
Linda, I think you're using my materials because this is the way that I phrase things exactly when I talk about them. Yes, because what we're talking about is fellowship/scholarship type income, what I call awarded income. So it kind of falls under all the same category. So yes, your tuition scholarship is part of that awarded income, but the tuition charge, if it exactly equals that, will make that portion of your income tax-free. So, oh, you got it from the cheat sheet. Okay, great. Yes. So it doesn't matter if the tuition is paid for by, it's called a fellowship or a scholarship. They're the same type of income. So you can use that method. I'm just reading this more carefully to see if there's any like nuances there, but yeah, but basically what's happening here is that, you know, the taxable component of your scholarship and fellowship income is going to be what exceeds that, you know, that level of the qualified education expenses. So usually that nets out to be zero if you're like a fully funded graduate student, you know, your tuition and your required fees and so forth. Sometimes there's a little bit excess on either way. So sometimes you may be able to make a little bit more income tax-free than, you know, part of your stipend, your fellowship stipend. Sometimes that can happen, but it's usually pretty close. So yes, I think that's a fair interpretation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll follow up with the panelists as well as all the attendees for the recording. Thank you very much for your time again and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Good to meet you all.
Bye. You too.
Nice meeting you.